I think the IUL has a couple of very specific applications in which it works well. I don't think it's a stock market replacement. I think that if you're doing the IUL and that is your only retirement plan, I think you're setting yourself up for disaster. I think the IUL only really works, and this is what we talked about on Facebook, right? This is the
Yeah.
power of zero mantra. It only really works as a complement to Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks, Roth conversions, taking money out of your IRA up to your standard deduction. If you can keep your provisional income low enough, then your Social Security is going to be tax free. We're trying to take advantage of every nook and cranny of the IRS tax code, not just one of them.
Brandon Ducharme is an investment advisor representative of and offers investment advisory services through SCF Investment Advisors Incorporated, an SEC-registered investment advisor, 10150 Meanly Drive, first floor, San Diego, California, 92131, 800-955-2517, www.scfsecurities.com. SCF Investment Advisors Incorporated and Ducharme Wealth Management are separate entities. The information in this podcast is current at the time of recording. It is based upon sources and data believed to be accurate and reliable. The information, opinions, and forward-looking statements expressed herein are subject to change without notice. Moreover, all comments and opinions voiced herein are for informational and entertainment purposes only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations and should not be interpreted as such. Further, the opinions expressed are Brandon Ducharme's and his guests and do not reflect the views and opinions of SCF Investment Advisors or any of its affiliates. Investing involves risk, including possible loss of principal. No strategy assures success or protects against loss. To determine what is appropriate for you, consult your financial professional. This information is not intended to be a substitute for specific individualized tax or legal advice. Ducharme Wealth Management and SCF Investment Advisors do not provide legal or tax advice. These services are provided by separate entities. The guest speakers featured in this podcast are not affiliated with SCF Investment Advisors, nor are they affiliated with Ducharme Wealth Management unless otherwise indicated.
You authored The Power of Zero back in 2013 was when it originally, you originally wrote it. Best-selling book in probably several categories. But it's all about the book. The essence of the book is how to get to a 0% tax bracket in retirement so you can make more prudent decisions with less speculation. And really what I get out of it is trying to harvest tax alpha, what I would call tax alpha, rather than trying to seek speculative investment return and then, stay, prey to the mercy of the IRS potentially. Right.
The general premise of the book is that due to unfunded obligations and spiraling debt and servicing the debt, cost of servicing that debt over time, the United States, and this has been actually borne out by a study by Penn Wharton, there's going to come a point in time beyond which no combination of raising taxes or reducing spending will arrest the financial collapse of our nation. And so the federal government's going to have to raise taxes, and dramatically so, probably in the next 10 to 15 years to stave off that sort of financial apocalypse. So the question is, if that really is the case, if what the Penn Wharton study is saying is true, why do 95% of Americans have the lion's share of their retirement savings in tax deferred retirement vehicles like 401ks and IRAs? Shouldn't we have shifted gears by now? And so really, if you find yourself like most Americans in a position where you do have most of your money in tax deferred accounts, what can you do now to take advantage of historically low tax rates so that by the time tax rates do rise over time, you've done all the heavy lifting, you can take that money out tax free? That's really the premise of the book.
That is a good summation of it. For anyone that hasn't read it, it's worth reading, even if you're not a professional in the industry or helping people. It's a pretty short read. I got a copy of it right here. It is 100 pages, maybe 80 pages or so. It's a 2.5 hour read, but a lot of really good information. One of the things that was eye-opening for me early on in the industry when I read it was understanding the implication of helping people maximize their Social Security benefits by managing the tax situation, right? And then my second pickup on it was, by the time a lot of people come to address the issue, it's too late, right? By the time you're already, hey, I'm 66 and I'm going to file for Social Security 6 months from now, you're largely too late, right? You're really become in between a rock and a hard place. And so there's a lot of planning that you talk about in the book that you can do ahead of time to do things like Roth conversions and reposition your tax buckets, or what you talk about in the book. And you help guide people through what you think is prudent amounts to have in each sort of bucket. I like the premise of the book. And I think one of the biggest things, though, that I always think about is that of all the things that you talk about in the book and the case that you lay out for why, and the kind of whole strategy that you try to put together, which there's no perfect strategy for everyone. And, once advice gets individualized, right, there's exceptions and deviations, and you got to deal with stuff as it comes. But there's so many people out there that read your book, throw so much of the meat and the potatoes out, and they zero in on the one part where you say, hey, you can do a LIRP, or life insurance retirement plan, which I'm not the biggest fan of personally, the term, but they zero in and say, well, David McKnight says, you want to be in a 0% tax bracket. So you need to take all your cash flow, stop doing a 401k, stop doing IRAs, stop doing all this other stuff, and, buy cash value life insurance, buy an IUL. And I think that just does your work such injustice. But you do know way more about IULs than me. So I wanted to come on and have a conversation about IULs, where they fit into people's planning, where they don't fit into people's planning, and what are the potential benefits, but what are the potential drawbacks? And then also, if we have time, what are maybe some of the alternatives to IULs? I think there's some other viable ideas out there from a concept standpoint that we could talk about.
Sure.
You game for those conversations?
Let's get it going.
All right. So index universal life, how do you define sort of what that is and where it fits into a life insurance retirement plan? And what do you think the most appropriate use case for that is?
Yeah. So there's three basic types of sort of cash value life insurance policies, whatever you want to call it: life insurance retirement plan, cash value life insurance, permanent life insurance. And the primary distinction between the three is the manner in which the cash value grows. We know we have whole life, for example. You hand your money over to the insurance company. They grow the money in the general portfolio of the company. They credit you a dividend. So your money grows at relatively modest rates over time. But, people have talked about it being a good bond replacement. With the index universal life, you link the growth of your cash value to the upward movement of a stock market index. Whatever that stock market index does in a given year, you get to keep that growth up to a cap. If it ever goes down in any given year, they simply credit you a zero, so there's no market risk. And the third one is VUL. I've got VULs on all my kids. I think that anyone, under age 50, a VUL is a good option because you got a long investment horizon. You probably want to get better rates of return over time. But I think that, each one of those options, you move to the right on the risk spectrum, on the risk continuum. The whole life is obviously the least risky of them all. You really can't lose money. Index universal life, you can't lose money in the market, but you can lose money because in a flat or down year, you're going to have to pay those expenses out of the policy. So you could, in theory, lose money in a given year. And then VUL, obviously, you're taking the brunt of the risk upon yourself because you're investing in those sub accounts that are linked to the stock market. So really, all three of those alternatives are distinguished by the manner in which the cash value grows. And there's different contexts in which each of those can and should be used. But the problem is some people, based on their licensure and what they can actually legally sell, tend to put all their eggs into one of those baskets based on, a narrative that they've adopted in a worldview. So sometimes when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And a lot of people get hurt along the way because these products are being positioned in the wrong way for the wrong type of people in the wrong context.
Yeah, I think so. Where I stand on it is I can do all of those and often do none of them. So I feel like I don't have much of a dog in this race. So let's ask the question: why do you like IUL versus whole life or VUL? Like what situations you highlighted that if somebody's younger, VUL might be a good option. But why whole life versus IUL potentially?
Well, I've written one whole life policy in my life. I think that was back when I started with MetLife Financial. It was a funeral policy. So I don't, as a matter of personal preference, I don't write whole life. There's a couple of reasons why I don't use whole life. Generally, when I'm using a cash value life insurance policy, the cash value accumulation is pretty important. So I want to be able to get, I want to be able to get more rate of return than I'm accustomed to getting in a whole life account. And then somewhere down the road, I'm looking to take that money out and spend it on my lifestyle at a period in time when tax rates are likely to be higher than they are today. And that's when loan provisions become very, very important. I was weaned on the idea that when you take money out, they're going to charge you a loan interest rate. You're not taking a loan from yourself. You're taking a loan from the life insurance company. They're loaning you money and they're charging you a stated rate of interest. That's a very real rate of interest. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then on the other hand, so that's what happens on one side of the ledger. On the other hand, they're opening up what I call a loan collateral account. They're taking money out of your cash value. They're putting it in that loan collateral account and they're crediting a stated rate of interest to that account. And there's some companies out there that credit you exactly what they charge you. So they might charge you 3.5%, but they'll credit you back 3.5%. So the net cost of borrowing is actually zero. And there's a lot of companies, not a lot, but some companies guarantee that in the contract so that when you ask for the money, you get the money. Your cash value goes down by that amount. You don't pay tax, and it doesn't show up on your tax return from a tax perspective, and you get to spend that money tax free. Whole life policies don't have that luxury. There is no guarantee that when you take that money out, it's going to be a zero cost loan. It could be in a given year if what they're charging, what they're crediting you back is the same amount, but there's no guarantee that's going to happen. And even if there were a 1 or 2% or even 3% net cost of borrowing over time, every year that you don't pay that loan back, they're going to subtract that loan interest out of your cash value. And even a 1%, I've done the math on this. We got spreadsheets that show it. Even a 1% net loan provision could bankrupt you 11 years faster. A 2% loan provision could bankrupt you 18 years faster. So when it comes to the type of planning that we do, whole life just isn't an option. Number one, the rate of return just isn't robust enough. The reduction in rate of return you experience in whole life can completely neutralize the benefit that justified doing the life insurance to begin with. And then the cost of borrowing, I think that is literally the most important provision in the entire contract. And if it's not guaranteed and it's not zero, you're going to be paying interest over time. And so I think people that position whole life that say you're going to be able to build money up and then take money out tax-free down the road, and they don't address the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is the loan provision, I think that that's a little bit misleading. And so I think that a contract that has a guaranteed 0% loan that can get safe and productive growth rates over time can accomplish some really interesting things.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's not a local company. I will say this. It is a company who's headquartered in a place in which we both used to mutually live.
Yes.
Their policies, when I've seen them, I have several clients I've found that they have sold policies to in the past, and when they went to take a loan in 2022 and even in 2023, because things were slowing down, market's down. So hey, if the market's down and you need money, borrow from your policy, right? Don't pull money out of the market was the theory. 8.75% was the loan interest rate on those. And but the reps would say, well, these policies with dividends, they'll do 8% a year. So steady, and it's like, well, first off, you're upside down 75 basis points on the loan. And so their solution was, well, you can go and pledge this policy and just get a line of credit at a bank really easy. And the problem is then you're on prime, right? The prime credit index, which right now is 8.5. So you're still upside down. And if you're, depending on if that institution would maybe pull your credit, you could be like prime plus half. Now you're at 9.25. You're still upside down. There's not really a way in which that's favorable. And so one of the things that I've noticed is that oftentimes on whole life, when somebody gets an illustration, I've never seen a whole life illustration that it shows them how money coming out of the policy as loans works on the back end, right? They say, oh, it's a feature, it can happen. But it never shows how that really works out. Hey, what if you start taking loans at 65? How long can you do that before this policy accident blows up? That's really a really good call out. And so how do you maybe pair that with the risk of the IUL, right? So what people that sell whole life will talk about is, hey, there's no guarantees in the return. There's no guarantees in the cost. And so maybe you do okay with the indexes, but you could goose egg. You can get no return, still have the cost. They can change your participation rate on the crediting. They can change your cap on the crediting. And so, because of those reasons, they feel whole life is a superior product. How does that, with the planning that you're trying to do, accumulate cash and then be able to take it back out in your lifetime for funding lifestyle, how does that kind of work out?
Well, whatever road you take in life is fraught with peril. I mean, if you put money in whole life and interest rates remain historically low, you're not going to get a great return on your money. There's going to be an opportunity cost associated with that low return. Literally anything you do has potential opportunity costs, potentially fraught with peril. There's no guarantees in life. What are you getting in exchange for that increased risk with the IUL? I think you're getting two things. You're getting potential for about 1.5% to 2% more return over time. I've talked to lots of actuaries. I said, level with me. What rate of return can I expect over time? We know interest rates are going to ebb and flow over time. What do you think is a realistic, and these are people that, they're actuaries, they're not salesmen. They're just telling me what they think based on the history of the program or where they see things going over time and Monte Carlo scenarios and things like this. What rate of return do you think the IUL can get over time above and beyond what I might be able to get in a whole life policy? And their consistent response is 1.5% to 2% more over time. Okay. So I'm going to get I believe if what the actuaries are saying is true, that I can get a better rate of return over time. And the other thing that, like I said before, that I'm going to get in the IUL that I'm not going to get in whole life is I'm going to get the possibility of getting a guaranteed 0% loan, which makes that entire problem that we've been discussing completely go away. This problem that says that if there's a net cost to borrow, that's going to weigh on your cash value, drag your cash value down over time, and could bankrupt your policy years in advance of when you ever thought possible, which means you're going to get a phantom tax bill from the IRS, and you would have been better off never having done the policy to begin with. So those are two things that I think the IUL gives me: greater return and the possibility of getting the money out. I always make this distinction. All life insurance policies allow you to take the money out tax-free by way of that loan, but you need the distribution to be tax-free and cost-free. Whole life is going to give you a tax-free distribution by way of that loan, but it's not going to be cost-free. It's never going to be cost-free. Okay. There's always going to be a net cost to borrow. And let me just give you, Brandon, a quick example of why I think this is important. I think a lot of us are familiar with this Ernst & Young study, where it talked about how the ideal approach, the ideal retirement approach that gives you the most income in retirement is going to be 30% of your money going towards cash value life insurance, 30% going towards an annuity, an income annuity, and then the rest going into some sort of investment. If you look at the fine print in that Ernst & Young study, it says that the whole life policy that was used in that study was used as a volatility buffer. What does that mean? That means in the year following a down year in the stock market, you live out of the cash value. You take a loan out of your cash value of your whole life policy. Mm-hmm. You use that to pay for your lifestyle. That gives your stock market portfolio a chance to recover before you take further distributions. And that act alone will allow you to take a much higher sustainable withdrawal rate on your stock market portfolio over time. In some cases, it can almost double your sustainable withdrawal rate with a 95% success rate. If you look at the fine print in that study, it says that after the stock market recovered, we paid back the loan to the life insurance policy. Well, you paid back the loan out of where? You paid back the loan out of your stock market portfolio, okay? Which means that you took money that could have otherwise been growing in your stock market portfolio and you put it into your whole life policy, right? Where it could have been growing at 8%, now it's growing at something much less. Where you would experience a difference with the IULs. Number one, for the volatility buffer strategy to work, you need at least 3 to 5 years worth of living expenses accumulated within that policy by day one of retirement. Well, if your money's only growing at, say, 3 to 4%, that's going to take a lot of money to accumulate, and a long time perhaps, to accumulate that type of money by day one of retirement. That's what you're stuck with whole life. With IUL, if I can get 5 to 7% net of fees over time, I'm going to get 3 to 5 years worth of living expenses accumulated much less expensively or much less quickly. And when I take that loan out, I'm not going to have to pay it back. I'm not going to have to take money out of the stock market portfolio to pay back the loan on the IUL, because it's a guaranteed 0% loan. But so those are just a couple of examples of how I think the IUL could perform more efficiently over time than the whole life policy.
Yeah, I think I haven't really given enough thought potentially to using it as that equity buffer, which is going to become an interesting, probably more interesting idea for people as interest rates potentially drop back down. That's a really good point. I'm going to have to read that study.
I wrote a whole book about it called The Volatility Shield, in which I spin this financial, it's a little financial novella. It's a little sort of not a fable, but an allegory that talks about how someone literally saved their retirement by incorporating this approach. So it's a viable approach. Ernst & Young seems to really like it. There's a lot of math out there. Wade Fowle loves it. Mm-hmm. I just think that the IUL is a superior policy when it comes to building money quicker and then taking money out more in a more cost efficient way.
So what do you think let me rephrase this. You can't just go get new life insurance policies all the time, right? You can't just say, well, I started with company A in this policy and I don't like it anymore, so I'm going to get, right? It's not like it's not like changing mutual funds in your IRA, right? It's not like changing your investment opportunities. There's implications, there's costs, there's underwriting. So if you have somebody that has, say, a VUL, right? So I'm 30 years old. Say I go out and get a VUL because I can take on that risk. Well, at what point do I start looking to say, well, I should be adding maybe an IUL to this? Because at a certain point, you don't want to be like you want your in an IRA, you can at a certain point just say, well, I want less stocks and more bonds, right? You can make that shift, that you can have that glide path. With insurance products, you can't say, well, I've accumulated all this money in this VUL. I'm going to retire next year. Everything's going great in the market. Let me just go ahead and 1035 exchange this into an IUL. Because although you can get the money there's surrender charges. So all of what you had available for cash value is not going to be immediately available for cash value.
Unless you do an internal exchange and the company allows you to take 100% of that cash value and apply it to your new policy.
Okay. So
that's a possibility.
So when you're looking at VULs, maybe really consider what that company has to offer for the IUL side and what their policy is around doing that.
The big issue with that approach, and let's say you start with a VUL and you have every intention of 1035ing that into an IUL, so that it can perform, it can do the types of things that you need it to do in retirement, whether it's volatility shield or safe and productive growth or what have you. The problem is you may have every intention of doing that, but when it comes time to get that new policy and you get underwritten for it, you may not even qualify.
Right.
So, in some regards, you may be better off just doing the IUL to begin with, have that be the bond portion of your portfolio, and then to go pedal to the metal in the rest of your portfolio that's in the stock market. Just go 100% stock, leave whatever portion that's going towards your IUL, that becomes the bond portion of your portfolio. It's growing safely and productively. You're getting, it's like Tom Hegna says, reach in your portfolio, remove the bonds. Replace it with cash value life insurance. You'll increase your return, lower your risk, lower the standard deviation of your entire portfolio, experience a better outcome over time. So it becomes your bond portfolio, and then you have a really stock heavy, allocation in the rest of your portfolio. And then you don't have to worry about the 1035s. You don't have to worry about, am I in good health when I decide to do that 1035 down the road? So that eliminates a lot of what ifs down the road.
Okay. So you think starting younger is better, right? Less likelihood of having those underwriting issues. You give the policy time to come out of surrender and have, full access to cash value. And again, have, you said 3 to 5 years worth of cash available in the policy, which for a lot of people in retirement, like once you factor in social security, income from annuities or pensions, whatever the other stable income sources are, oftentimes isn't as big or as daunting as people think. I think. What can we talk about situations where it doesn't work? Like where this is just patently kind of really a silly idea to jump into IULs?
Yeah. I mean, I talked about it in my recent video. I don't think IUL works great for infinite banking. I think you need predictability. And whole life is much more predictable. I mean, let's call a spade here. Whole life is more predictable. You're not going to have any down years. Your money is steadily increasing in a very predictable way. And so that that's the mainstay of, infinite banking. That's the mainstay of using, a life insurance policy for whole life investing, those types of things. I think you're just better off with a whole life in that context. I'm not a huge fan of using index universal life for those types of things. I know Doug, Andrew, and others out there are. To me, I've just never really gotten on that bandwagon.
Well,
and so I get really uneasy when people talk about the IUL being the silver bullet, the panacea. You can use it in all of these different contexts. I just don't think that's the case.
Yeah. I know in my practice and in my firm here in St. George, we like engaging with the community and we like helping people. We're pretty mission driven. And so we do a lot of pro bono, just answering questions for people and taking a look at something for them and, helping them out, setting them in the right direction. And we've had this just overwhelming amount of people in the last several months asking us about IULs. And there's people in my community that are selling them to people as a retirement plan, as an alternative to health insurance, which is patently, in my opinion, crazy.
Right.
And they're selling them as, this is probably one of the ones I chuckle more, the intergenerational wealth retirement plan, where, you set one up on your kids,
my kid could be a millionaire if I just do $50 a month, right?
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. And the part that, there's two things that I notice is that in almost all these scenarios, when we get the illustrations, because we'll tell people like, hey, listen, we're happy to spend a little bit of time talking about your situation with you, and then let's take a look at the illustration, and we'll just see if you understood what you know what I mean, what you kind of have here, right? And if you think it aligns with your goals, then great, go for it. If not, then we'll just put the ball in your court with some education and do what you will. But it's very common that we're seeing proprietary indexes like the pace setter index, the pace. I call it the pacemaker index. Get ready, you're gonna need a pacemaker after you have a heart attack, realizing how bad you lose on this. And it's uncapped. They say like it's uncapped growth with the S&P 500 and or this or that, and but then no explanation of participation rates and all this stuff. And so what's getting illustrated out is like a 14% return, for people. It's like, we saw one late last week that what had been illustrated to them was an average annual compound growth rate of 14.9%.
That's nuts.
In their IUL. And so these people had bought those. The other thing that is almost in all of these scenarios where people have been sold these policies, they don't have any other type of investments. They don't have Roth IRAs. They don't have 401ks. They don't, own investment real estate. They don't own any of these other things. That was step one, right? Hey, if you buy this product off the shelf, here's your IUL. Boom, you keep putting in your $200 a month, and you too someday can, be a millionaire with, the never having the risk of losing money in the stock market. You can only make money in these blue skies ahead. And it's actually emotionally draining sometimes to have these conversations on our end because we know it's so bad. But why do people think, what is it, David, that you think drives people to think that this is appropriate?
Gosh, I mean, I hate to take a really dim view of human nature, but it's the profit motive. There's these little sales gimmicks out there that people have adopted that they think that obviously have a track record of inducing people to want to buy IULs. And I think insurance companies create these designer indices that anybody with 20/20 vision can say, look, had this index been around since 2003, for example, this would have accumulated 15.3%. That's not a useful metric when it comes to deciding whether or not you should do an IUL. I think the IUL has a couple of very specific applications in which it works well. I don't think it's a stock market replacement. I think that if you're doing the IUL and that is your only retirement plan, I think you're setting yourself up for disaster. I think the IUL only really works, and this is what we talked about on Facebook, right? This is the power of zero mantra. It only really works as a complement to Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks, Roth conversions, taking money out of your IRA up to your standard deduction. If you can keep your provisional income low enough, then your Social Security is going to be tax-free. We're trying to take advantage of every nook and cranny of the IRS tax code, not just one of them.
Yeah.
Because you never know when one of these alternatives is going to be legislated out of existence. And there's just a lot of pitfalls that can happen when all you have is an IUL in retirement. I mean, namely, you take money out of the IUL year over year over year, during potentially during a down market, because you don't have any other investments that you could potentially tap into, then you could potentially have that spiraling, death spiral that happens when, you're taking money out during the down year over and over and over and over and over again. And you have the expenses associated with the policy that are coming out that same year. It's sort of the problem with the VUL. Except the VUL, that problem's on steroids, because if you lose 30%, you're paying for even more insurance and the expenses increase. So that sends you into a death spiral. So it's sort of that problem is sort of attenuated somewhat in the IUL, but you really need to have the IUL as the bond portion of your portfolio, as a volatility buffer, and not as a stock market replacement. And I think everything else is static. Everything else is just part of the fray that gets people distracted from what they really should be doing. I have no problem if a young guy puts 30% of his retirement savings into an IUL as a volatility buffer approach. But you have to make sure that you're putting all the rest of the money, you're actually putting the other 70% someplace productive, preferably a Roth 401k or a Roth IRA.
And I think the biggest call out and highlight is with a sufficient amount of risk to the money. Right, you're going to have to take the risk, and I think that's what
100% stocks.
So many people forget you can't. In IUL, in my opinion, in whole life would be even to the left of this, but an IUL is just right of, saving cash. You know what I mean? Like you're going to get a return. You're going to make a real return. Hopefully, you do have inflation risk because you have capped upside potential. So if inflation goes crazy, right? But we talked about that. There's always risk in everything. There's no perfect solution. So that's one of the downsides I see to IULs, right? If inflation prints at 9% a year for a decade, right, IUL could have a hard time keeping up in real return sense, but it's a pretty conservative tool. And if you have limited resources, you're the average American trying to make it to retirement, it is very hard to save your way to retirement. I think people generally agree that you have to invest your way to retirement, right? You cannot stuff money under the mattress or keep it in a savings account. I think people, if you said you layer CDs at the bank and in your savings account as a way to save for retirement, people probably think that's a little silly too. I think IUL is to the right of that in risk return, but not, relative to other options that you really should be considering. It's not very far, right? So if you are going to put 30% in your example into an IUL and 70% then into an equities. If you're in your early 30s, you're already starting out behind the risk curve, in my opinion. Like you're already in a 70-30 in, portfolio at that point. So you need to make sure that you're taking sufficient risk that is productive, that does have a good risk reward profile. And you're going to have to be really sensitive and aware, and probably get, truthfully, some professional help, making sure that you're taking the right risk and getting the right, getting access to the right things. And for some people, it might be prudent to even consider some stuff that maybe is leveraged to help increase that return and offset the decrease in risk of putting, money in building this volatility buffer of an IUL, if that's the route you choose to take.
Yeah. I think it comes down to what your expectation is vis-a-vis the return in the
Sure.
IUL.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think, for example, I don't know what you're positing here in terms of what one could get in a savings account. I don't know if you're talking about high yield savings account or a savings account at the local credit union or whatever.
Sure.
This is what I tell people, and this, I think history has borne this out. I think that you can expect between 5 and 7% net of fees over the life of the program. Obviously, 7%, we're going to have higher interest rates over time, so that the options budget these insurance companies are using will allow for higher caps.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that I'm usually pretty comfortable with 6%. 6% is more than what I think you can get in a savings account. I think it's more than what you can expect in a bond portfolio. So I don't know what people are expecting in their stock portfolio. Maybe it's 8. Okay. So let's say you got 30% of your portfolio where you're getting 6%, you're getting 8% and 70% of your portfolio. I don't think that IUL is going to be a massive drag on that portfolio. Okay. And if it allows you to double your sustainable withdrawal rate on your stock market portfolio in retirement, because you have that volatility buffer in place by day one of retirement, I think that the math is going to work out. But that's why you got to do the math. I mean, the math, if you can take 8% on $1 million, and the traditional approach is only going to get you to $1.5 million, and you can only take 4% out of that, then the 8% withdrawal rate is going to win, because you set up that volatility buffer. So, I mean, the math has to work. This is not pie in the sky type stuff. We're using real rates of return. I think conservative, realistic rates of return of what the IUL has accomplished over the last 20 or so years.
Yeah.
And we're looking at the math on what a stock portfolio might be able to distribute income-wise at an 8% growth over time. And if the math works out, you do it. If the math doesn't work out for you, then you don't do it.
I think this is a very prudent approach to trying to solve issues, right? And you're just like good advisors, just try to use math to solve issues. And then the math needs to work in conjunction with human behavior. I think that's the part that some advisors a lot of times forget, right? I know in Morgan Housel's books, he writes about that. And I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of that approach, because if you go back and look and you say like, okay, well, using 4-to-1 leverage on an equity portfolio in every scenario comes out better, but you get wiped out, whatever, over the course of 50 years, you get wiped out like eight times. It's like who would get wiped out that many times and actually just, restart the program, right, and keep going. Right. And so people just can't stay the course on something like that. So you have to be more realistic. With a behavior expectation. I think IULs can potentially help on that. I appreciate the message of somebody in this space that knows the policies, that has talked to actuaries, that cares, and you're trying to have a really balanced conversation, really balanced approach. For that, I truly do. Thank you, David. I have a concern about the plan that I think is fair to talk about. It's not definitive, and it's just maybe a crackpot theory. But what happens in a scenario, and this isn't to say that you are wrong, but planning for contingencies. What if the tax brackets don't double because the U.S. government just prints, they just continue to print money, so they they pay back the deficits with inflated dollars. Which is truthfully a huge increase in tax, right? That is them increasing the tax rates. It's just them doing it in a different way, right? But how it kind of, nominally happens here sort of matters for this type of plan. What do you think could happen? Like what are the potential drawbacks to the power of zero planning if that's what manifests itself, right? If the government continues to just overprint and pay back debt with inflated dollars, and there's just, we go through a sustained cycle of elevated inflation.
Well, if you watch my documentary, The Power Zero, The Tax Train is Coming, we interviewed Alan Arbach, who's a professor out of UCal Berkeley. And he talks about how when you look at the 75-year trajectory, unfunded obligations, this is what Larry out of Boston University, Larry Kotlikoff, calls the fiscal gap problem. Mm-hmm. He says, we have a $200 trillion fiscal gap. What does that mean? He says, if you look out over the next 75 years, project all of the expenses that we have to pay for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and you project out over that same time frame what we can actually afford to deliver under today's tax rates. He actually says there's a $239 trillion fiscal gap. In other words, you would have to have $239 trillion sitting in a bank account today earning treasury rates to be able to deliver on everything that we promise that we can't afford to pay. What is most of that? What goes into most of that $239 trillion? It's the cost of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. So that's the problem. The real problem facing America is what we promised for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Here's the problem with printing your way out of that issue. All three of those programs are linked to inflation by law. Okay. If you try to print your way out of the problem, you will increase the cost of those programs commensurately through inflation. So it's like a dog chasing its tail. Yeah. So there's no way to print your way out of the problem. You cannot solve the problem through monetary means, right? So you print money, inflation goes up, the cost of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid goes up, and you're right back where you started at square one. So that's why most experts believe that printing your way out of the problem does not solve the problem. The Penn Wharton study that came out a few months ago, they say there's only two things you can do. You can either increase taxes, reduce revenue, reduce spending, some combination of the two. So it's going to be obviously some combination of those two things, a combination of a reduction in these entitlement programs and massive influxes of revenue. So I wrote a whole book called The Infinity Code that sort of pokes fun at monetary theory, modern monetary theory, this idea that you can just print your way out of the problem. You can tap into the infinity bucket to pay, your country's expenses. It just doesn't work. And most experts agree that it doesn't work.
At some point, it's got to all come to an end. When? I don't know. Okay.
2043.
2043. I thought it was.
Penn Wharton says when we hit 200% debt to GDP, which is in 2043, could be as soon as 2040 when we hit 175, then no combination of raising taxes, reducing spending will arrest the financial collapse of our nation. The snowball is too big at that point. It's picked up too much speed. You cannot arrest the gravitational force of that snowball moving down the mountain. It's too late. So sometime between now and then, something huge has to happen or we become Rome, right?
Kind of interesting there's a lot of uncertainty out there in the world. And I guess no one really knows exactly what's going to happen or what it's going to look like. But I guess all you can do is diversify what you're trying to do and have different contingency plans and ideas put together. And that's what a financial plan or a good financial plan is.
We make a big deal about educating people on the fiscal landscape of the country because a lot of people, they think they're reading the handwriting on the wall. In their heart of hearts, they know something needs to happen, but they can't quite put their finger on what or what exactly it is about the fiscal trajectory of our nation that seems to be putting them off kilter. But we articulate that for people, and we articulate that the reality of higher taxes is an inevitability. It's not an opinion. It's actually math. And we are already beyond the point of no return in terms of not being able to raise taxes. So tax rates will have to go up. Ed Slott says it. David Walker says it, former Comptroller General of the U.S. government. All of these, Ray Dalio says it. Larry Kotlikoff says it. They're all on the same page. We need massive infusions of cash or we go bust as a nation.
the world is going to continue to get crazier. I think. I don't know. We'll see. I always try to just help people put together solid plans, keep as much equity exposure as prudently possible, plan for contingencies, and be well diversified in both investments and thought. Last question I have for you. You have another book coming out soon, The Guru Gap.
Yeah.
Right. You want to just tell me real quick what that covers and what I can look forward to reading in that?
Sure. Guru Gap subtitle is How America's Financial Gurus Are Leading You Astray and How to Get Back on Track. So this is, I'm not saying this is my magnum opus, but this is a book I've been waiting to write for a very long time. I take on the likes of Dave Ramsey, Susie Orman, Ken Fisher, Clark Howard, Ramit Sethi. And basically the basic premise of the book is, look, these guys all have really large audiences, so they have to package their advice in one size fits all sort of format, which is not the type of advice that you need if you are looking to wring the most efficiency out of your retirement dollars. Let's face it, everybody's goal is to have their money last through life expectancy, to wring the most efficiency out of your retirement savings. The question is, does the advice that gurus give you, which excludes annuities, which excludes cash value life insurance, which in some cases calls for 100% stock portfolio through actuarial life expectancy in the case of Dave Ramsey, which includes in the case of Dave Ramsey, 8% withdrawal rates in retirement because you think you're going to get linear 12% rates of return, excludes cash value life insurance, excludes any sort of annuity, particularly if you're a follower of Ken Fisher. Will that, mathematically speaking, allow you to wring the most efficiency out of your retirement savings? And so I go through all of those different gurus and I assess their advice, and I sort of put a finer point on everything. I say, look, this is what you'll get if you adopt this particular piece of advice. This is what you could get if you adopted an approach that took account of all of the different financial tools that you have in your toolbox.
I'm excited to read that book. I think a lot of the gurus, I explain the gurus like the guy showing up to a party with like the bucket of vanilla ice cream, the 1 gallon, like the 1 gallon pail of vanilla ice cream. No one's going to be mad he's showing up with vanilla ice cream. And it's kind of hard to be upset. Like the guy showed up with ice cream still. He gave people generally what they wanted. And, some people might be able to put some different toppings on it and make it a little bit more to their liking. But it's kind of hard to offend people, and it's kind of good for the masses. But it's the plain bucket of vanilla. That is not what most people actually want, especially once they introduce their own personal preferences and appetites, right? What people really want is to know what all the flavors of Ben and Jerry's is and say, well, I like cherries and I like almonds and I like all this stuff. And, I want something that's more custom fit to me in my circumstances and my tastes and what I'm accustomed to. And that's the power of individual advice, is getting that efficiency piece to work correctly, because what they're giving is maybe 60% of a plan, but they sell it as the whole thing, right? Just do this. I will teach you to be wealthy. Well, I think you'll be taught to be wildly inefficient, and you might get there, but it's probably going to be actually more difficult than it needed to be.
Yeah, everybody loves ice cream, and vanilla's better than nothing. But how much better off could you be if you had 31 flavors, right? That maximized your happiness, if we're going to run with the analogy here, right?
Yeah. No, I like using ice cream. I think that resonates with most people. That like, if somebody said, let's go get ice cream, or let's go down to the grocery store and pick out some ice cream, people say, you know what, give me the big tub of plain vanilla, and what happens is, even that big plain tub, it shows up pretty fresh, but the longer it sits in your freezer and nothing's been changed to it and nothing's been updated, it just becomes an old, disgusting, freezer burned, unapplicable bucket of cream that no one really wants. And so as people get older and they really look at their retirement planning and they really look at their finances, you start finding all these inefficiencies that make huge differences to people. And so that is the power, I suppose, of individual advice. I'm really interested to read that book when it comes out.
Right. And people can get that and pre-order that on Amazon. And if you go to my website, davemcknight.com, You can input your order ID and you can get the first chapter for free.
All right.
Otherwise, you got to wait until December 10th when the book actually launches.
Well, I'm looking forward to December now for one more reason.
All right.
Well, appreciate your time, David.
Yeah, a lot of fun. Appreciate you having me.